And let me say it's a great honor to introduce my good friend and fellow comrade, Lou Abela, who is going to talk about his job search transition, which was rather unique. And his insights are going to be valuable for you folks. So I'm grateful that he volunteered this time to do this for us. So Lou, do you want to introduce your topic?
Sure. Thank you, Alan. Well, folks, my story real quick, essentially is I was out of work for 15 months. I found a job. That's it. Thanks. Well, actually, there's a lot more to this. That's just kind of the cover. That's kind of what ended up happening. The reality is that finding this job was really a long journey. And along that way, there's a multitude of different things that I ran across. So let me start out by introducing a little bit more about myself. My name is Lou Abela. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I've been out of the military for over 20 years. My background includes 20 plus years in application development, working as everything from an individual contributor to a director, both in IT and business side of the house. I have an MBA as well as a Bachelor of Engineering and Engineering Physics degree with a concentration in computer engineering, which is why I got into application development. And I've got some other certifications as well. This specific part of my journey actually started, and I think it's important to understand this, but this journey started when I was working for a company, and the company had been going through some transition, and we had a new CIO, and I was working in a satellite office, so we weren't the main office. The CIO was with the company less than 2 months and had talked about making rounds, going around to talk to people in these satellite offices. So I got news that he was coming down to see us. It's like, okay, great. The CIO comes down, calls me into a meeting. And the very first thing he tells me is, your position's been eliminated. Thanks and have a nice day. My job ended that day. Needless to say, that was kind of a little bit of a shock. And how do you get past that and continue moving forward? Well, they did provide me a couple of things. They provided me about 4 weeks worth of severance pay, as well as the opportunity to go to one of these transition companies. So I started off by thinking to myself, well, I've got 4 weeks. I've been in this situation before where I've been let go from positions because they've restructured. So it wasn't new to me. And one of the things that I've learned along the way was that when this sort of thing happens, one of the first things I like to do is I like to think about, I want to take a little bit of time for myself. I want to get over the shock of what's going on. And then once I get my head clear and I have a little bit of me time, then I can focus on starting to move forward. So I didn't directly jump into a job search. What I did do is I went out and I did go sign up for unemployment, as well as started going to this transition company. Now, this transition company, when I went in there, they started talking to me about things like, well, you need to get in there, you need to do LinkedIn, you need to update everything, you need to grow your network, you need to change your taglines, you need to post on there, you need to get known, you need to learn how to brand yourself, you need to stand out from other people. Well, for a person who, like I said, I've been through this before and I've never had to go through all that, it was kind of overwhelming to start with. I went through and they started providing me, here's the template here, here's this, here's that, started filling this stuff out and went back to them. Now they had people who were considered experts at doing LinkedIn and other ways of social media. But I will say this, I am not a social media person. It was kind of a foreign concept to me. So I started getting into it. But then I was told things like, well, your taglines aren't unique. It's all the same thing. I hear it from so many different quarters. You really don't show a unique value. And I'm like, here's my resume. And one of the big issues that I found was that when I had my whole history laid out there on my resume, the people I was working with, they didn't understand what I did. where I fit in. They didn't understand IT from a technical perspective of what I had been doing. But I continued to work through all this. And so 3 months came and went. And even though my old company had paid for this, what I got out of it is I felt like it was just a job to them, that they were just kind of putting me through the motions and saying, hey, these are the things you got to do, but really didn't provide me any personal experience moving forward. So at the end of 3 months, the contract with them ended, and I was still looking for a job. Now, at this time, I had assumed that the position that working with these people, I would have been able to find something. That was not the case. The one good thing that did come out of that is that one of the meetings that they had set up was a meeting with a gentleman by the name of Nathan Perez, the author of the 20-Minute Networking. And so I went to this and I listened to him talk about his book, and I purchased one. And it was kind of a unique experience. I actually purchased the executive edition, not the veterans edition, because at the time I went, he didn't have a veterans edition. He was working on it. So I've had a different little experience there reading through the book because it's tailored a little bit differently. But what ended up happening from there is a series of ups and downs that I went through in my journey to find a new position. Along the way, I actually found out about the Eagle Group as a meeting place for veterans, and I started attending. And I still remember it was hard to start because it's one of those things where it's networking like every other networking group I'd been to. And I'd been to several different networking groups out there. A lot of them ended up being things like, you go in there, you stand up, you say who you are, you say, well, what is a company you're looking for? What industry are you in? And people hurriedly are scanning through their phones going, oh, let me find someone in LinkedIn in this company or that company. And then they're shouting out names. Hey, look at this person, look at that person. And I'm like, okay, trying to write it all down, trying to get all that behind me. But then after all that, I'd go back and be like, oh, well, now I got to see about how do I connect with this person, do all that work all over again. And it was kind of still like feeling like it was very much on my own. When I started working with the Eagle Group, I heard all the same things. You need to be on LinkedIn. You need to grow your network. You need to update your profile. You need to figure out what your value proposition is. And so I was thinking, okay, we're going through this again. But one of the big differences I found there, well, before I get to that, let me share a couple other stories with you about this. One of the biggest issues, as I say, there were ups and downs during this whole transition. One of the biggest issues that I had to deal with was those down periods. As an example, I had a networking opportunity. I went in, I was actually talking to a CEO of a company, and I walked in there and I found out he was prior military, and we started talking about the Eagle Group. Well, he was asking me questions about it, and so I talked for a good 10, 15 minutes on it. And by the way, I was using the 20-minute format, so that didn't leave us a whole lot of time to talk about other stuff. Well, we got to the end of our time, and he asked me, he said, well, do you know how much of the time that you spent talking? And I said, well, I think about 60%. And his response to me was, oh, it was a lot more than that. And the reason I bring this up is because during that meeting, when he told that to me, I left that meeting thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I've screwed up. I spent too much time talking. Upon further reflection, what I really realized is that I spent most of the time answering his questions, but part of was what he was looking at and saying, well, what can he get out of it, out of this network meeting? Now, it wasn't my intention to go in there and spend time talking about the Eagle Group. That's where things went. But he didn't realize that. His thoughts were more along the lines of, I wanted to say something more. And I'm like, well, it's a conversation when you're talking to people. You need to understand how to have that conversation. And the biggest reason I bring that up, and the reason that this meeting sticks in my mind, is because after that, I spent a lot of time trying to self-analyze myself. Spent a lot of time in my own headspace wondering about what I did wrong. And is that something I continue to do over and over again? Because even as I was networking with people, I would find that I could hear something someone would say, and that might add into my own personal dialogue that's going on in my head. That, coupled with other things, a lot of interviews that I went on to, where it's kind of, you feel like it's the perfect interview, but you just don't land it and you don't understand why. I'll give you another example of an interview I went for. It was for a director level position of a large restaurant firm in the IT area. It actually was through an outside executive recruiter that were the single recruiter doing all the recruiting for this position. In other words, no one else was putting forth candidates, just this external recruiter. The recruiter contacted me and said, come on in, let's talk. So over a course of about 2 weeks or so, I spoke with the recruiter. I came in, we talked over my credentials and everything, and he said he thought it'd be a good fit. Now, during that time, he told me two things. One, he told me that there was a salary cap because they actually had put forth another individual who had determined that they wanted more money than the company was willing to pay. So they already had hit a hard limit. And then the second thing was that I wasn't the only one they were putting forward. Okay, so I'm like, okay, well, we'll go in here and see how things are. My next interview was with the CFO of the company, Chief Financial Officer. I went in there. We had a great conversation. Everything looked great. The CFO wanted me to come back for another interview. So the following week, I came back in with an interview with one of their senior technical people. I walked in. The senior technical person had actually spent time in the Navy. And so we spent the first 10 minutes of this interview basically throwing jabs back and forth with one another between the Marine Corps and the Navy. We got along fabulously. It was a great time. However, during that meeting, the CEO showed up after about the first 10, 15 minutes. And I'd been warned that the CEO might show up for this. So I'm like, okay, understood. Well, the CEO came in, he sat down, didn't say a word to me, pulled out his phone, spent the entire rest of the interview on the phone, never asked me a question. At that point in time, the whole tempo of the meeting just changed. And I walked out of there feeling like, okay, what's going on here? And I went back and talked to the recruiter. But later on, I found out that the CEO actually had decided to go back to that first person that got put forth. And even after they said, no, we're not gonna discuss any more money. In fact, we're not gonna talk with this person anymore. They decided to go back and offer that person the job again. Well, needless to say, I was frustrated because I had just spent a month of time setting up these interviews, going back and forth. And I'd gotten to the point where the executive recruiter I was talking to told me at one point that out of all the candidates we had, he believed I was the front runner just from looking at my resume and what my experience was. So I felt like I just spent a month of time going through all this for absolutely no reason because the people there making the decisions didn't know what they wanted. And when they got to the point of saying, hey, here's a hard limit, we're not going to bypass it, they decided to second guess that. And it's like, do you realize that you're taking up my time as well as all these other people to go through this? That just added a lot to the frustration, added a lot to basically the self-doubt that I was feeling as well. Those are the sorts of things that I ended up having to deal with when I was going through this long-term transition. And I say that just to be frank and honest, things got bad. I got stuck in my own headspace. I kept going round and round about, why can't I find a job? What's wrong with me? Why don't my skills match to anything? Why is it that I keep, feeling like I'm almost to the finish line and then someone else races past me and wins? It was frustrating. It was uh, not a great time. In fact, it impacted me. It impacted my family life. Um, my spouse was tired of hearing me go on about how it was difficult to move forward, find that job. And this is where I really believe that the Eagle Group came in and really helped me, because with everything else I've been talking about, when I did start with the Eagle Group, I started with a base understanding. We all have the same experience when it comes to the military. And having that kind of similarity with other folks is really a great starting place, because people can understand at least a part of you. And the one thing that I got out of the Eagle Group that I didn't have from this transition company was the fact that now we all of a sudden have a stable group of individuals who are there to help you out personally. The things that I went through, when I say the Eagle Group talked about the exact same things, well, it's true. But at every step of the way, there were folks there to help guide me. When I was feeling down, there were people to talk to about it. When I felt like I'm not sure what to do here, there were people to help guide me. It wasn't, hey, just go out there and network. It was like, okay, well, what are you looking for? Let's talk about it. We went through drills. We talked about, how do you find your 5 stories to make sure that you can relate to people? Let's talk about practicing your elevator speeches. What is it you want to say about yourself? So the whole idea about self-branding was, what are the things you want to bring forth about yourself? And through all of that, what I started to really learn was that everybody out there is going to have their own opinion of you. But what really matters is how you present yourself, how you hold yourself, and what you think about yourself moving forward. Because what I learned is that I have value. I have great value that I have to offer to other people. I just have to remember that not everybody is ready to accept that, or they're not ready to see that as I move forward. And so it was always about looking for the next opportunity. Now, with that being said, I did find a job after 15 months. And the way I actually found it was, I had a networking meeting with one gentleman who basically told me he was networking with me, but he didn't know if he could do anything to help me. He was a project manager at a company, had been there 3 months, really didn't know the lay of the land, but he was doing this because someone previously had helped him out. Well, I looked at the company and I decided to apply for an open position they had there as a development manager, and put down his name, asked him if I could put down his name as a reference. That got me the actual interview. And what I found out later on was that the hiring manager had interviewed me and had gone to him as a reference and said, "What do you know about this guy?" And he said, "Well, I really don't know anything. However, I did meet with him and he seems like a nice guy." And just based upon that, they decided to hire me. So it's that kind of networking, even at a point where I had networked with people who were CEOs, CIOs, high-level individuals, but even someone who felt that their own worth about helping networking was very low. I found actually I got the most boost out of that individual. Now, I'd love to say that was the end of my story, but it goes on a little further, because what I ended up finding out is that I got this new position, which basically soon became my life. I mean, I was absorbed working 60 plus hours a week, always thinking about work. At that point in time, I actually had to drop out of the Eagle Group because I didn't have time anymore. But what I found was that I really enjoyed helping out other people, which I had been doing when I was working with the Eagle Group. And so after a bit of time, I actually started up the networking again. I found a new position, much less demands on my time. And I decided to come back to the Eagle Group because stories like these, I think, are important to be told, because all of us are human and we all go through this sort of thing. My biggest takeaway was when I realized I couldn't exist in my own headspace because it was a spiraling downward trend. And having the group here to help lift me out of that, to help give me a path to move forward, was really what helped me keep it together and helped me get to the end of finding that position and continuing moving forward. So that's my story. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you get something out of it. I think there's a lot to be said there. Just know that the people here in the Eagle Group, they run through the same issues. We all know what experiences you're going to be going through and what it feels like, and we're here to help each and every one of you. So thank you for your time.